Breaking It Down with Frank MacKay. This is 103.9 LI News Radio.
Welcome to Breaking It Down. Our very special guest is Jack O'Halloran. We got that right?
That's correct.
And Jack is a wonderful actor and a guy you don't want to meet in a dark alley. He spent a lot of time in the ring. Jack, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
How much time did you spend in the ring?
9 years.
And you fought at heavyweight, I imagine.
It's the only thing they let me fight.
Yeah, you're 6'6", if I remember correctly, right?
That's correct, yes.
Are you still 6'6"?
Maybe a shy bit under, I don't know. Sometimes they say we're shrinking, but I don't know. Last time I got measured, I was still 6'6".
Now, you fought in the 70s. Who were some of the people that you...
60s and 70s, yeah.
60s and 70s.
Yeah.
Who did you fight against?
Oh, God.
Jerry Quarry, did you fight?
Jerry would never fight me. I fought Norton. I fought Foreman. I fought Alvin Blue Lewis. I fought Bugner. I fought Terry Daniels. I fought Cleveland Williams. I fought Danny McAlinden, Carl Gizzi. A whole host of them.
Yeah,
I had 76 fights. I had a few.
Well, 76 fights, and you still sound clear. You sound clear as a bell. I can't imagine being hit that many times, and just anybody. I mean, my God, I had the pleasure of dining and certainly interviewing Jake LaMotta, and I know he's
good guy. Jake's crazier now. Crazy guy, good guy though.
Crazy guy, good guy, but yeah, I mean he took a lot of punches too, and
he did. He did. He had Jake had a couple hundred fights. Jake had been around the block a few times.
A couple of 100 fights. I mean, you think about that. It's just an amazing, amazing thought. So, Jack, at what point did you figure out that it's easier to make a living and as an actor than it is in the ring?
Well, the hardest thing, one of the things I never really talked about that much because it was at the end of my career when we found it out. I had suffered from a disease called acromegaly. And
what is that?
Acromegaly is a tumor of the pituitary.
So that allowed you to keep growing, or that?
Well, yeah, it's a growth hormone in your body that actually more prevalent in women than it is men. But women who have it are like round-faced, red round-faced, square-looking women who they have a certain look about them. Acromegalics have a serious depression problem, and some growth problems are in some people. Some people they just stay squatty, and it causes profuse sweat. A lot of no one knew about it. It's such a rare disease, and no one knows where it comes from or how you derive it, or And I went through most of my career and never knew it, other than the fact that my jawline was changing, and because your jaw grows out, and different things were going on that people just attributed. They thought I cracked my jaw boxing, and it grew back wrong because I never got it fixed, and with every excuse. And then I came out to California in '72, towards the latter part of my career, to fight Ken Norton, and Norton and I had a barn burner. Boy, it was a great fight, and I wound up staying in California and became the California heavyweight champion, and beating a guy no one else would fight, Henry Clark. And there was a local doctor there who was the boxing commissioner, Bill Lundeen. He was a sharp GP, and I remember I went to his office for my physical for the Norton fight, and he looked at me, and he looked at old pictures of me, and he said, you're an acromegalic. And I said, yeah, can I fight? He said, yeah, well, it's something you should look at. So when I stayed on the island, he and I became good friends because I had a half dozen knockouts in a row. I was really, getting ready to fight Muhammad Ali. And he said to me one day that I went for a physical for one of my fights, and he said, here's the deal. Either you go to Scripps and get a workup, or I'm pulling your boxing license. Because this is a serious disease, and you really need to You need to look into it because it'll kill you. And because we became good friends. And so I went to Scripps, and sure enough, boy, I was pumping out like 200% growth hormone when you're only supposed to pump out 10. And they wanted to do a surgery and all this other jazz, and I said, no, I don't think so. So I went, so it appeased him, and I arranged for. I called some doctors on the East Coast, and I found out that I didn't have to go through a surgical procedure, because if you did that, it removed your pituitary gland, 86% chance of that, and you'd be on hormones, orally for the rest of your life. And I didn't feel like going through that trip. So they found the guy on the East Coast up in Boston, at the Mass General, and he had a machine up there that was at Harvard called the cyclotron proton machine. And it's a laser, but a different type of laser that's used in other things. And it doesn't burn. It causes inner explosions. And there's only two machines in the country. There's one out at Stanford and one at Harvard.
Still to this day, there's only two machines?
I believe so. I haven't looked into it lately, but I think so. And this guy was the breakthrough. The doctor up there, he was the pioneer of this whole deal, and Raymond Chelberg. And I went to see him, and he threw me right in the hospital. And they came in and did all the tests, and the fun part was that I had a back operation, and not back. I didn't have a back. I had I saw him afterwards when I had my back operation. Anyway, I go into the hospital and I get this whole thing done, and they bolt you to a machine, and they put 4 screws in your head, and so you can't move, and they hit this thing. And I was one of the 1,000 that it hit. Boom, knocked it out the first time, shot it out. Yeah. So I'm in the hospital. And the guy, when he was going to do it, he said to me, "How did you ever box? How did you ever get in the ring? With this disease?" And I just fluffed it off. And
hey, Jack, let me remind people that we're listening to Jack O'Halloran, and he's originally was a boxer, and now he's an actor. He's a wonderful actor. He's had all types of great roles. Go back to it, Jack. I'm sorry.
So I checked myself out of the hospital and went to fight Larry Middleton in Baltimore, Maryland. I trained a day for the fight. He was number 2 ranked in the world, and the doctor said I was insane, because he said, "Yeah." And that was like the end of my career, right around the last couple fights I had.
How old were you when you retired?
I was 32, I think.
32, and
5. So yeah, I was 32.
So did you end up fighting Ali?
We were signed 4 times, but the fight never come off. He and I signed to fight in San Diego. And because I had the town by storm, boy, and I had a promoter down there, and we exchanged telegrams, and I had just fought his brother. He made a deal with me. He called me on the phone. He said, "You got to get my brother out of boxing. He's embarrassing me." So I knocked his brother out. And
Muhammad Ali's brother? I don't know about him.
Rahman Ali. Yeah, Rahman
no kidding.
Ali. Yeah. I didn't know it was his brother. I said, "I'm fighting your brother?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "You're fighting my brother this week." And I said, "Oh, my God, I better go in the gym."
So you said you could say you knocked out Ali.
Yeah, he was an Ali.
He was an Ali.
He's not a bad fighter, the kid.
No kidding. How long did that go? How long did that fight go?
9 rounds.
No kidding.
Well, he ran like a thief. he was fine. I mean, in fact, we got to a point where in the 8th round, I went back to my corner, and my trainer said to me, "You better knock this guy out, or they're going to steal this fight from you because of who he is." And I said, "Don't worry about it." So the next round, I went out and I laid on the ropes. He came at me, and I knocked him out. And he said, "God, he was actually hurt him. I thought I hurt him bad, but he was okay, And so Muhammad and I, we were supposed to fight in San Diego. And Kenny Norton was owned by some serious people. Isn't
Norton from San Diego?
Well, he was a Marine base down there.
Okay.
He's actually from California, but Kenny was a good. I like Kenny. Kenny was a good guy, boy. Sad what happened to him.
Yeah. Also did a little acting himself.
Yeah, Kenny did Mandingo and a couple things. Kenny was a pretty good kid, but it did. But anyway, his people went to Chicago with $3 million, gave it to Herbert Muhammad, and Norton got the Ali fight, and I wound up with fighting nobody. So, it's the same thing happened when I was boxing down in Houston, Texas, and Lou Viscusi called me up in New Jersey. He said, I want you to come down and fight Terry Daniels, who was ranked like number 3 in the world, I think, from Ohio. And they were looking for a fight for Frazier. So I went to Houston, and I showed up in Houston, and he said, "You're in shape." I said, "Well, aren't you supposed to be?" And I knocked this kid out in the 3rd round, and then I went back to Philly with Yank Durham on the plane, and he said, "If you fight one more good fighter and beat him, you can have the Frazier fight." And I said, "I'll tell you what, you call me up and tell me when the fight is and who the fighter is. Send me a ticket, and I'll show up." So they called me a week later and said, "You go fight Cleveland Williams in Houston, Texas." I said, "Give me a date." And I went out, beat Cleveland Williams, and Terry Daniels got the Frazier fight, and I didn't. I saw nobody. So it was just that's what's boxing. But when I retired, I had already. They had come to me for the film business way before I retired. I had knocked out Manuel Ramos, who was ranked number 1 in the world in L.A. Back in '68. And after the fight, they came to me to do The Great White Hope. And
who was that with? That wasn't with Bronson, right? That was with
no, that was with James Earl Jones.
James Earl Jones, right?
He played Jack Johnson, and they wanted me to play Jess Willard.
Oh, so no kidding!
They flew me out, and they made me. The deal was done. It was already put together by Eddie Foy, and they offered me a deal to go to Spain for 6 months, and they were going to pay me so much money a week and stuff like that. And I looked at the guy and I said, I just got done knocking out the number 1 ranked heavyweight in the world, and you want me to give up boxing and go to Spain to do a movie, and you're giving me how much money? He said, "Well, we're going to give you $1,500 a week." I said, "I give that away in tips, so what are you giving me? You're not giving me anything." And I said, there's a guy that really needs a job. His name is Jim Beattie, and he just retired from boxing. And he lives in Minneapolis, and he's got 6 mouths to feed. Call him up. He needs a job. I said, "You're turning us down?" I said, "Well, I don't think this is for me." I was walking out of Fox, and James Earl Jones was walking up the steps when I was walking down. Show you how small the world is. And he stopped me. He said, "Jack O'Halloran." I said, "James Earl Jones." He said, "Is it true what I just heard about you?" I said, "Depends on what you heard." He said, "I understand that you just told Hollywood to take the biggest movie in Hollywood and stick it." And I said, "Well, I don't know if you want to call it that way." He said, "I got to shake your hand. I never knew anybody that did that before." So and I had another opportunity prior to that. Steve McQueen did a picture called The Thomas Crown Affair in Boston. And we took care of him while I was up there, and we became friends. And he wanted me to quit boxing and get into Thomas Crown Affair, and he used to call me on the phone, "You got to come to Hollywood." And then he did a picture called The Towering Inferno, and his name was Captain O'Halloran. He called me up and he said, "How do you like your name on the screen?" He said, "Get yourself out of here. You got to come out to Hollywood." And I kept saying no. Then they called me up when I got done boxing, and I had a couple construction companies in New Jersey, and they called me on the phone, an agent of mine from San Diego. I did a lot of commercials when I was in San Diego. And she said, "They're looking for you to do a picture, and I think you should do it." And I said, "What picture?" "Farewell, My Lovely" with Robert Mitchum. Had a starring role. And I said, "Done deal, let's do it." So I went and met the director in New York, and they flew me out to do a screen test, and Robert Mitchum said, "It's either him or I don't do the movie." And it's all Mitchum's fault.
Hey, let me remind people, I don't want to cut you off here, but let me remind people who they're listening to. Jack O'Halloran is an actor, and he's a former boxer, and you've fought some of the toughest guys out there. I know in 1970 you fought George Foreman. How hard did Foreman hit?
He banged pretty good. I mean, he caught me a pretty good shot, and they stopped the fight real fast, which kind of ticked me off because it was in the 5th round, I think, and I was beating him 3 out of 5 already. So,
who was the hardest hitter? You fought? You ended up fighting Norton.
Norton, yeah, Norton. I beat Norton pretty bad, and they gave him a decision. Actually, I could have sat on my stool in the 9th round and won the fight in San Diego. And they called me up to fight Norton. I had a lot of problems on the East Coast, and I said, "Where's the ticket?" So I trained like 4 days for the fight. And in the 9th round, he and I were standing toe to toe, and I had cut him up pretty bad, and he was bleeding out of one eye, and people were standing on the chairs screaming so loud that when they rang the bell, nobody heard it. So they rang it 3 times. Finally, the referee separated us, and I went back to my corner, and on the way back, he ran across the ring and hit me behind the head and drove me into the ring post. And Joey Almus, the commissioner, jumped up in the ring and said, "If you can't continue, you just won the fight." And I said, I was so mad. I said, "I'll kill him. What are you, crazy?" And I went at him in the 10th round. I said, "What am I doing? I'm in his hometown. Am I nuts or what?" So he won a split decision down there, but I won the town. It was a great fight. In fact, one of the better fights, heavyweight fights in California history. So, and I went on to, make a name out there and fight for the heavyweight championship of California and won that. And then I retired. And then when I went into the movie business, I did Farewell, My Lovely, which was a great film, and it is a classic today. Mitchum was wonderful. Just an amazing man.
A boxing fan too, I think, Mitchum, right?
Oh yeah, he was a good. Robert was a good guy. He was just one of the best. And then I did King Kong, and I started working. I worked nonstop.
Was that the Jessica Lange Lange one?
Yeah.
How was she to work with?
Jessie was beautiful. She's such a lovely woman. You knew she was going to be a star. That was her first picture, but she just had that quality about her. She's just a nice person, and a very talented lady.
Now, who stands out as far? Well, first of all, how many films have you done?
God, I forget.
Jack O'Halloran, by the way, is our very special guest.
12 or 13, something like that. I mean, I could have done a lot more, and I kept turning them down.
Now, having said that, go ahead.
I worked right up to Superman, and I quit one picture on the 15th of March and started Superman on the 23rd. And in the interim of that, I turned down the James Bond picture of the part of Jaws because I'd already signed it. I was doing.
Was that Richard Kiel?
Yeah. In fact, Richard Kiel's career consists of 6 pictures that I turned down.
Maybe you should have had better advisors. It sounds like you made a lot of decisions.
I was working all the time, but then after the Superman movies, and I did a couple films, Hero and the Terror with Chuck Norris, and The Baltimore Bullet with Jimmy Coburn and Omar Sharif, and then we did the Flintstones, and we did another picture I did too. Anyway, so I started writing, and I wrote a lot of scripts, and I've written a serious book that's been published, and we're just getting ready to make a film out of that. It's one of a trilogy.
Hey, Jack O'Halloran is our very special guest. He's a boxer, actor, and now we're finding out writer. Jack, not to get too personal here, but how did you do financially with boxing?
Well, when I was boxing, the only guy that was making money was Ali. When I first started boxing, I was boxing out of Philadelphia and Boston, and you were getting, like, for 4-rounders and 6-rounders, $70 and $80 and $90 a fight. I think I fought Norton for $2,500.
Wow. Yeah, well, I mean, back then, you could. It's a down payment on a house, right? $2,500.
Well, yeah. You just. But you fought. I fought one year 26 times.
Wow, that's just crazy.
But it was great because I'm one of 5 or 6 people that ever went into the heavyweight boxing ranks and was a world ranked fighter without boxing amateur.
Right.
Because I played pro ball, and before I went into boxing, I was 23 before I ever put a glove on.
Oh, I didn't know that. You played. What did you play? Football?
Yeah.
And who did you play for?
Well, I was up with the Jets, but you couldn't play when I was in school. You couldn't play pro ball till your class graduated from college. There was no hardship cases in those days. So I left school in my sophomore year, and Webb Eubank grabbed a hold of me and said, we really like the way you look and the way you play, and I redshirted on a Eastern Coast. They had like a farm league, that you played to keep your levels up, and we were playing like 3 games a week, both ways,
Yeah.
But and then when it came time for me to be able to play, Philadelphia had a lot of great players, and I had a lot of friends down there that were playing, and Jurgensen was there, and Tommy McDonald, and so I said to Eubank, Philadelphia's given me an offer to go down and play, and he said, well, if it doesn't work out, you got a home here. So I went down to Philly, and I was going to play down there, and then they brought in Coach Joe Kuharich, and I watched this guy trade a championship football team away in a month. He traded Sonny Jurgensen. He traded him to Washington for Norman Snead. Traded 5 of the best young linebackers to Green Bay for a 32-year-old Gene. Ringo his career was over actually, and he just did one after the other, and the only guy left was Timmy Brown, and he said trade me, and I said this is not fun anymore. So a friend of mine said, Ali had just won the title, and I was a street kid. So they said, I said, I can beat that guy. And they said, what a great idea. Let's put him in the gym. So I went in the gym and trained for 6 months, and I started boxing.
Well, listen, we have a very, very special guest here, and he is Jack O'Halloran. And he's been our very special guest last 22 minutes. I think we need a part 2 with you, Jack, and we'll get into some of the movies and some of the. You've never
read my book, have you?
No, I haven't. Who
You're
published
a New Yorker, aren't you?
I'm a New Yorker.
My father was Albert Anastasi.
Oh, no kidding! Oh my gosh!
So I wrote a book.
How do you get a name like O'Halloran from?
That's a long story. Next time we talk, I'll tell you about it.
I'll tell you had a storied career. And it's certainly very interesting. Your life should be a movie, and hopefully we'll get to that pretty soon.
Breaking It Down with Frank MacKay. This is 103.9 LI News Radio.
Welcome to Breaking It Down. Our very special guest is Jack O'Halloran. Well, let me ask you about your father's death, if I could. How old were you? And your father was
14.
shot down, right?
Huh?
Your father was shot down?
My father was the guy they shot in the barber chair.
Right. That's the famous. I think they even mentioned that on The Sopranos.
Probably one of the most famous organized crime pictures ever shown around the world.
And you were 14 when this happened?
Yeah.
How close to your dad were you?
Wasn't.
You weren't. You didn't.
No. I was raised. He left me in Philadelphia with my mother. For a reason, he had a reason. He knew there was trouble coming. Albert, you got to understand why Albert died. I mean, Albert was the glue. You understand? He ran Murder Incorporated.
Yeah.
He was the enforcer for the whole commission, and Albert was against drugs, and he controlled all the ports. And Vito Genovese wanted to bring the drugs through his ports, and he said, "Not on my watch. You're not doing that. Ain't happening." So they begged him. Meyer was his best friend, and Meyer and Traficante. Actually, the night before he died,
Jack,
they met him.
Not to cut you off, but did you ever get to meet Meyer? Did you get to meet any of these folks?
I knew Meyer well. Meyer raised me. Yeah.
Oh, no kidding. Yeah. I mean, I knew
Frank. I knew Meyer. I met Charlie in Naples.
So how do you get the name O'Halloran? Did you change that because of the
No,
the
my mother was married to an Irishman named O'Halloran, and I was a love affair. I was a war love affair. My father was in the Army in Indiana, Pennsylvania, teaching soldiers how to be longshoremen when everybody in New York was looking for them. Which is a funny story as well. But when they electrocuted Lipke, Albert was the prime candidate. Because he was head of Murder Incorporated, and he was the head of. He wound up being the head of the Gambino family. Was his family.
How tall was Albert?
Albert was about 5'10".
He's 5'10", and you're 6'6".
Well, my mom was 5'11".
Yeah. How about her parents? They were much taller?
Yeah, that's where I got the height from that side. And the acromegalia.
No kidding.
Yeah. It's acromegalia. My body frame is probably 50, 60 pounds heavier than it should be.
Now, Jack O'Halloran is our special guest today. You mentioned something about the Kennedy assassination. Are you friends of Oliver Stone?
No, I know him, but
no, I'm half teasing. But you mentioned something about the.
I mean, everybody talks about this, and now the truth has been coming out, which it does every 30 or 40 years. Now it's 50 years that things come out that tell the truth about what really happened that day. And Oswald never pulled the trigger. That was a farce. Now, are you going off of documentaries that you've been watching, or are you going off of any inside information that you had? I mean, Albert. I was there that day.
You were in Houston.
I was in Dallas.
No kid. Oh, in Dallas. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And did you witness the shooting?
No, they made me leave town. I was there at a party the night before at Clint Murchison Jr.'s house, and I went there with Coach Schramm from the Dallas Cowboys on the predication that I was going to play with the Dallas Cowboys, and then Clint Murchison Jr. owned the Dallas Cowboys, and he had a party at his house the night before the assassination, and the party was entitled Egyptian Nights, and it was a tribute to J. Edgar Hoover, and I was sent there by Meyer to educate me, to see who was at this party, all the people, bankers from New York, and I saw LBJ, and I saw Nixon, and I saw Bush, and a few other people.
Was Bush around at that point?
Bush was a Texas boy, you know.
Yeah, but was he a congressman at that point?
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
head
right.
of the CIA.
That makes sense that he would have been.
He was actually head of the CIA.
Yeah. Now, listen. Having said all of that, again, you're listening to Jack O'Halloran. Who killed Kennedy?
Kennedy was killed by. He was actually killed by his father. Actually, caused his death. He was killed for the sins of his father.
Sam Giancana?
No, Sam Giancana had nothing to do with his death.
Did you know Sam?
Yeah, I knew him well. Mooney knew him very well.
Now,
Sam Giancana was double-crossed. If it wasn't for Sam Giancana, Kennedy would have never got nominated.
Yeah, well,
he never would have been elected.
Well, I would agree with that. I mean, they say that there's still
it's the truth. If the truth was ever told, but you see, if you look into that, you got to look into Joe Kennedy. Joe Kennedy was owned by Chicago from 1922 on, and he did not like that. The only building that Joe Kennedy ever put a dime into, he built the Mercantile Building downtown Chicago because he was told to. That's the only building in this country he ever put money into. Even though they had buildings dedicated to him at Harvard and all, they gave that to them. They didn't. He never put his own money up to build the buildings.
Hey, let me ask you again: who killed John F. Kennedy?
He was. There were 13 shots fired that day at Dealey Plaza.
13 shots.
First shot that hit him in the throat. The first shot that hit him in the throat came from Johnny Roselli, who was down in a cauldron in the street. And he shot him from the cauldron as the car coming down Dealey Plaza. That was the first shot. And then he fell forward. People saw him grab his throat, and he fell forward. And he got hit in the lower back that they never talked about. And then the guy driving the car took the last shot that when you see him go flying back and the back of his head comes off, was the driver who shot him from the front.
I mean, listen, that if people are listening, they're thinking that puts what Oliver Stone said in perspective. I mean, that's way beyond conspiracy there. I mean, do you have?
Well, I had the seven missing frames from the Zapruder film.
Do you still have them?
Yeah.
Now, are you doing a book on this, a movie on this?
No. Well, I mentioned it in the book. The book isn't about it. It's just one of the feats, one of the things in America. What the purpose of us doing these books is to tell the truth about some things that happened in this country that we wind up taking the blame for, that it wasn't our fault. Everybody thought the mafia killed Kennedy, but that's not true. I'll ask you one question.
Yeah.
Who was the top cop in the country when Kennedy was killed?
Hoover.
No, he wasn't.
Who was?
Bobby Kennedy was the Attorney General.
Right, okay. Yeah.
And Bobby Kennedy was his brother's second skin everywhere he went. Okay? And 8 people went to see Bobby Kennedy prior to Jack going to Texas, and they told him, including Adlai Stevenson, do not let your brother go to Texas. He will not come home. It's very bad blood down there. So, and there was reasons for that, okay? And the reasons were all very well clearly spelled out. When Jack when he was running for the nomination out here in California, H.L. Hunt came out with a ton of money and gave it to his father to make Lyndon B. Johnson his vice president. And when Jack became president, the very first thing his father said to him was, I want you to impose a tax against the oil people of Texas. They got too much money.
Well, I mean,
think he made some people angry?
Yeah, I would imagine. But look,
then he,
I thought one of the things, and humor me, right, because I wasn't there, right? I'm not in on this. I'm not Albert Anastasia's, son or whatever. But one thing that made sense to me is that, and again, I'm not particularly a conspiracy theorist, but Sam Giancana obviously had a relationship with Kennedy and with Joseph Patrick Kennedy, and he won that election. Kennedy beat Nixon by Illinois.
That's exactly correct.
And
they talked about the Bush election in Florida. Let me tell you something. People in Illinois, there were dead people voted 20 times.
Yeah, well, also there's probably districts that were good for Nixon. You'll find the voting booths down in Lake Michigan somewhere. People are still finding them. But and I'm sure that was Giancana that he would. And again, Sam.
Let me tell you something. He would have never gotten nominated. And when Joe Kennedy went to Chicago to plead for his life because again he was in trouble in New York with Frank Costello, and he ran to Chicago to ask for help. And Sam said, "Why should I help you against my dear friends in New York?" And he said, "Well, because I'm going to take every dime I have and all the political power that I possess, and I'm going to make my son Jack the first Irish Catholic president to walk into the White House." And Sam said, "Well, that's a pretty good idea. And I promise you both his ears," is what he said. "I promise you both his ears. In other words, anything you need or anything you need to discuss, he will hear it." And, of course, as soon as Jack was nominated, or as soon as he was elected, and the first thing he did was make his brother Bobby Attorney General, when Joe Kennedy swore to Giancana that Bobby would be made ambassador to Ireland and they would get him out of the way. And he made him Attorney General. And as soon as he made him Attorney General, his father said to him, "Put all my good friends in jail." And he went after everybody.
And let me ask you this.
Double-crossed Giancana.
What was your relationship like with Sinatra?
Sinatra was my father's the one that got him out of his big band contract.
Was he the one in the Godfather that they referenced? They played it. Vito Corleone had Luca Brasi put the gun to his head, and he said,
"Put a gun to his head." Exactly.
And who was it? Was it Tommy Dorsey? No, it was
Tommy Dorsey. Yeah,
Tommy Dorsey. And
they got him. They got him out of his big band contract. But my father said he was a rat. He said I shouldn't have done it. He was a rat.
That Sinatra was a rat.
Yeah, they never really liked him because he wasn't the one. Sinatra wasn't as connected as people believe he was. His wife was connected. In fact, Frank, for 10 years after he divorced his wife, he wasn't allowed in New York.
Nancy, the older Nancy.
Yeah.
Jack O'Halloran is our very special guest today, and we're a little bit all over the board, but this is fascinating stuff, Jack, I got to say. Very good stuff. As far as...
Frank was a great entertainer, and if it wasn't for Giancana is the one who got him the part in From Here to Eternity. It wasn't anybody from New York. Yeah. Sam Giancana got him that part.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't think that's...
He liked the way he sang. Johnny Roselli hated him. Johnny Roselli wanted to shoot him 12 times. And Sam liked the way he sang. He said, "I like the way the kid sings." But Sam helped a lot of entertainers in Chicago. He owned several clubs.
Hey, let me ask you, Jack, did Albert Anastasia, did he acknowledge that you were his son?
Yeah.
He did? And you didn't spend much time with him?
No.
Did he have other sons that he spent more time with?
Yeah, he had a son and 2 daughters that he lived in Fort Lee with.
Son and two. What's your relationship like with them? Is it existing?
I don't have a relationship. Young Albert died, and one girl is married to Tony. Jesus, he runs the union on the waterfront. Good guy.
Did you ever have any relationship with the Anastasia kids?
Hello, how are you?
Like that? Did they acknowledge you as a half brother?
Well, yeah. It was a known fact that they all played in those days, and like I said, Albert was in Pennsylvania. He spent a lot of time in Philadelphia because of the waterfront there. And he was in Indiana teaching soldiers how to be longshoremen when everybody was looking for him. And he wasn't even a citizen when he was in the Army. That was the funniest part of it all. He didn't become a citizen until after he was out of the Army.
What was your father, Mr. O'Halloran? Who was he? Jack Sr.? Was that how that was?
No. My father was my mother married a man, and he went away. He was in Germany after somewhere in the war, and she had a relationship with Albert.
Yeah. Now, let me ask you, was your father connected at all, O'Halloran, your stepfather?
No.
He wasn't connected at all?
My mother was more than my mother. My mother was very close to some serious people in Philadelphia. And one guy was a minder of mine. His name was, he was an engineer at General Electric, Rip Collins, and he was Tommy Collins' first cousin, the great war hero from Ireland.
Sure.
It was his first cousin, and he was head of the IRA in Philadelphia.
Was that a relation to Michael Collins?
Michael Collins, yeah.
Right, Michael Collins you're talking about. You're right.
It was his first cousin, yeah. And he was an amazing man. I mean, he looked after me when I was a kid. He was just an amazing individual.
So you grew up in Philadelphia?
Yeah.
Yeah, you grew up in Philadelphia.
Grew up in Philadelphia, and then we moved to Jersey, and then I graduated from school in Jersey, and then I went from there to New York, and I lived in New York for a few years, and I got into my father's business, and then I was up in Boston and Rhode Island, and Boston's a lot like home for me, but I've been away from the East Coast for a long time. I lived in Europe for 20 years, and came to California in the 60s, but I used to go back and forth every weekend.
Jack O'Halloran is our very special guest, boxer, writer, actor. Jack O'Halloran has certainly had a fascinating life here. Did you ever do any time? Did you spend time in jail?
No.
You never did?
No, they tried. Not for lack of trying.
Yeah, you were tried and you won?
Yeah, I beat every case I ever had.
Yeah, and well,
they tried. They tried to put me away a few times. I was always a couple steps ahead of people.
Yeah. Now, how involved was your early career in boxing with the mob?
Well, I'll tell you this way: if Frankie Carbo had been home from jail, I probably would have been heavyweight champion of the world. Because I could fight, and just if I ever went away to camp like these fighters do, then no one would have ever touched me. I mean, no one would have ever beat me. I took fights on 2 days' notice, 3 days' notice, because I didn't care.
Did you ever take a dive?
No.
You never took a. Well, you ever asked to take a dive?
No.
You were never asked to take a dive?
No.
Yeah. I mean, do you know that? I mean, who are you closest to? Norton, Foreman, Frazier, I imagine, right? You have some relationship with Frazier.
Frazier would never fight me.
He's Philadelphia. Eddie Foy.
Yeah.
Eddie Foy was Frazier's manager. Am I right?
Eddie came in his life, I think, late on. He was managed by some people in Philadelphia, and he was trained by some people in Philadelphia, and there was two fighters he would never spar with: Leotis Martin or myself.
Now, let me ask you, where did Don King come on the scene?
Don King came out of jail in
manslaughter, right? He had a manslaughter charge.
Wow, that's bold. He was a bookmaker, and he kicked an old man who was half dead already, and the guy died. He was collecting money from somebody. That's such a smokescreen deal. Don, when he came out of jail, I met him at Ali's camp, and he wanted to manage me. He said, "Oh man, let me take you to the title." And I said, "I don't think so." He was a bookmaker from Cleveland. I knew Don very well.
Yeah. What do you take from Don King? I mean, a very bright guy, I imagine, right?
Oh, he was the guy you can't deny. He was an extremely bright guy. Still, he was. I have a record in boxing. Like, I had one fighter that I took to the title. One fighter, one champion. And I started Freddie Roach.
Ah, well, that's interesting.
With a kid called Frankie Lyles, who was a super middleweight champion of the world.
I remember Frankie Lyles.
Well, I took him to the title. I trained him and I managed him.
Well, how did you make a living all of these years? I mean, you've had such an interesting career, but a lot of it's not huge success, and I don't mean that as a slight. You had your success in boxing, you had success in acting, but you never had that big, huge hit. How did you make a living while you were doing all of this?
Well, when you say you never had that huge hit, I'm an icon from the Superman movies.
Right. Well, no doubt about it. But how much did it? And you don't have to be specific. But how much did you get paid from the Superman movies?
Oh, I made $1 million in Superman.
You made $1 million in Superman?
Oh, sure.
No kidding.
Yeah.
I mean, Brando made $1 million, right? For his.
No, Brando made $6 million.
Oh, no kidding.
But Brando only worked 11 days.
No kidding.
Brando, and he owned 20-some points in the movie.
You made $1 million off of the suit. That's amazing.
Well, back in those days, it was amazing. But we worked. You got to understand how long we worked.
Yeah, well, no, that's good. I mean, you had a piece of the action?
No.
You just got $1 million to do...
Just the merchandising.
Oh, no kidding. Merchandising. Now, what was your role in Superman for those who are just tuning in now?
Well, you had 3 super villains that flew around.
Right.
And I was the big guy, Non.
Yeah, right. From Krypton, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's a hell of a thing. And again, by no means was that a slight. Are you kidding? But you never had that, that one thing that you can latch on to.
I could have, Farewell, My Lovely. Farewell, My Lovely. If I
keep in mind, we have 2 minutes left on the, for the recording.
Farewell, My Lovely. If I had listened to Mitchum, I'd have won an Oscar.
Yeah.
For supporting actor that year.
And
but he wanted me to do the Johnny Carson show, and I turned it down because he was live, and I was afraid he was going to ask me about my father. And I said, if you ask me about him, I'll ask you where the men's room's at. And Mitchum said, and he was right. I should have done the show. It's Hollywood. Who cares? But I was very protective of where I came from and who I was, and it was just one of them things.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what about regrets? I mean, we've got about 2 minutes left.
No, I have no regrets. No, I have about a dozen pictures I'm getting ready to do now. I'm producing and writing, and I'm, I have no regrets. I waited too long to do my book. I should have done it a little earlier, but I wanted Meyer to pass away and some other people because I didn't want them to have to go through any rigmarole.
Now, where do you live now? Jack O'Halloran's our specialist.
Redondo Beach, California.
Oh, that's nice. You've been transported for many years into nice warm weather. A beautiful area over there.
Oh yeah, it's tough when but I lived in Europe for 20 years. I kind of like Europe a lot.
All right, now we have less than a minute left. Tell us what's your priority for this year. What's your shopping priority? What you're shopping. What
I want to make the film of Family Legacy and the television series I want to put in place and I've got a half dozen other pictures that I'm going to produce that I kind of like a lot. And I'm writing another book, and I have another book called Gray Cloud that I'm writing. And I got a few things on my plate that I'm kind of excited about, actually.
Oh yeah, I mean, it stands to reason that you would be. I mean, this is fascinating stuff. I mean, it's like my life and my career. It's all over the place, but I mean,
we want to do Family Legacy in 3D. And no one's ever done a mob picture in 3D before. And I've got some technology that I can do that works extremely well to where I can put my father in the movie and digitalize him, and you'll swear he's there.
That's amazing. Well, hey, listen, we appreciate your time. Jack O'Halloran has been our very special guest. He's a boxer. He's an actor, a former boxer, we should say, and he's an actor. He's a writer. He's a producer. And he's the son of Albert Anastasia. It's amazing. That's a mouthful right there. Jack, I want to thank you very much for your time. It's been a fascinating 42 minutes here, 44 minutes. You're the best, Jack. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.